Thank you. Right, please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Economy and Housing Policy Committee on the 23rd of February 2026 from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor James Batho, Chairperson of the committee. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available for later viewing. Please ensure that mobile phones are on silent or switched off. In the event of an emergency or the need to evacuate, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all instructions from the team. I would like to welcome members of the public, which I don't think we actually have this evening, and visiting councillors in attendance today. So turning to the agenda. Item 1, apologies and deputy members. I believe Councillor White is unavailable and being replaced by Councillor Lee. And Matthew, any further updates on that?
No, Chair, that's all the apologies. Thank you.
Thank you. And on to item 2, the declarations of interest. Can I ask if members have any declarations that they mention those now? Thank you. So I take it there are no declarations. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, Chairperson's announcements. Given that we've got quite a bit of interest on the agenda, I'll not have anything additional on that. And then item 4, the minutes of the previous meeting. This was held on the 25th of November 2025 and can be seen on pages 5 to 10 of the agenda pack. Can the previous minutes be agreed, please? Okay, thank you. I don't believe we have any public participation. Thank you. So we have Lynn Mellish and Sandra Salter, welcome, from the TAC board joining us this evening, and who I've asked to join us during our discussion on agenda item 6. So I'll move on to that item because we are going to spend the majority of our evening engaged in that. So we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is exploring the future strategic direction of our housing revenue account for the years 2032 to 2037, looking beyond our current commitments for new homes and retrofit. I want to look at this agenda item in a slightly different way from our regular committee approach, and hope this will generate more understanding and debate amongst members. I will ask the Cabinet Member for the officer to introduce the item in a moment. Following this introduction, we will adjourn the meeting and separate into 3 groups. Each group will be tasked with constructing a balanced HRA budget that weighs competing priorities, such as investing in existing stock, building new homes, or redeeming debt. We will then reconvene after 45 minutes to discuss each group's findings, and then myself and officer will try to summarise the key points coming from the discussion. I was keen to widen the involvement as much as possible, and pleased to welcome committee deputies, Councillor Brophy, Councillor Horrell and Councillor Lee, who are joining the committee members for this item. I hope that with a wider involvement, this committee can achieve a cross-party consensus on the future policy options in this area. I'll now hand over to Councillor Reach and Simon Hendy to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee. I'm quite looking forward to this. The interactive session that you've just outlined was something that we've discussed for some time. Good policy is not made in a vacuum, and it's also not monopolised by the person who happens to be sat at this end of the table. And hence why I thought it would be a very good opportunity to invite views from all around the committee on what we do in this really important area. So this evening, choices are important. These are tenants and these are their homes that we're talking about, and future tenants and future homes. Hence, this proper discussion we're going to have. And I think it's critical that we have open and engaging conversation, discussion where we can. There are no wrong questions. There may be some wrong answers. I can't vouch for mine, but I'm sure Mr. Hendy will correct me if I am wrong. But if there are any points of this which are complicated, then by all means, there are officers on hand to answer. And I think what we have to try and do is think about, what is realistic here. There are financial constraints. The financial context is tricky. Councillor Batho mentioned, debt, and we'll talk about debt, and we'll talk about interest repayments and the like. And also we should mention that local government reorganisation is going on. So although what we're talking about here is Winchester and the Winchester HRA and the demands that we have on our housing service here in Winchester, we know that by the time these decisions are put into practice, this will not be the geography upon which the HRA is administered. Nevertheless, I think we should focus on the task in hand. As I've said repeatedly, we need to continue. We need to make sure that this housing service has a good future, and that we have a clear plan and a clear pipeline for what we're going to do. Whether we will be the decision makers for that, who knows? But I think clarity of thought at this stage is really helpful, particularly because we're going through this reorganisation. And I think we have to remember at the end of it as well, we'll do lots of, see these lovely bar charts around here. We can pull this lever, we can push that button. But we need to remember this is about tenants' homes and making sure that the supply of homes, of good quality, safe homes, which are cheap to run and in the places where people want them and are delivering for our tenants, that is at the heart of what we're trying to do here. So we're testing ideas. We're going to explore some trade-offs. Officers are on hand to answer any complicated questions. I'm on hand to answer any simple ones. So hopefully that's enough introduction, and I'll pass back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reach. Simon, do you want to add? I think there's a slide pack. Great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think there's a slide pack which I was just going to go through. Yes, please. And the slide pack really sort of sets out the sort of rules for engagement in the interactive session. So as I'm going through that, please don't hesitate to ask any questions, because it's important that we get those out before you actually start looking at this issue. And just to reassure you, even when you're working in the interactive session, Kevin, Karen and I will be available to answer any questions, and we'll wander between the groups, so you'll have an opportunity to ask us any questions that come up during that as well. So here we go, one question to start with.
Sorry to be a pain about that, but I just thought it might be useful when you're going through it, if you are in agreement, to pull out what the sort of what's the current algorithm, what's driving what you've built so far, what's got you to 2032, so that we know what levers we're sort of playing with, and how we can move them going forward. Thank you.
Right, so as has been mentioned, we have a current housing revenue account and housing revenue account business plan over 30 years. There's some existing policy commitments of this council to deliver 1,000 new affordable homes by 2032, to invest in retrofitting the existing housing stock by 2030. Post 32, there are options available to the council. Picking up Councillor Bolton's point, the default in the housing revenue account business plan, default is always to start repaying debt, and that's what the business plan does at the moment. So post 32, although there's cash available in the business plan, it's defaulted to repaying debt, but it doesn't have to do that. That's the whole purpose of this evening's discussion, because the policy options open to you to discuss this evening are maintaining service levels in terms of the landlord service, investing in the housing stock, so that's maintaining investment plans, maintenance, major repairs, but it might also be retrofit work as well in that, delivering more homes, or redeeming housing revenue account debt. So there are 4 broad policy options that you can use any capacity that exists on an annual basis in the housing revenue account. You can mix that up and which way you see fit. So the interactive session, what we've actually done is come up with a highly simplified housing revenue account on the graphs, and you're probably aware that you'll be broken up into 3 groups, so they're on the flip charts here. The numbers are not exact numbers from the housing revenue account, but they're pretty close to them. Your task will be to work over the next 45 minutes and to balance the housing revenue account on an annual basis. You'll see on those charts there's a green bar, which is the rental and service charge income each year, and next to it we've put in there the items of expenditure that you can't change, and I'll go on to explain that later. And then you'll be able to make up what you want to spend the balance of the money from up to the total of the total income that's available each year. Now, the rental charges across each year have been set in line with the government guidance, which is currently CPI plus 1% year on year. The government's just completed their consultation on something that's called rent convergence, and I can go into the detail about that if you want, but basically on the basis of what the government's suggesting at the moment, that would give you the ability to have about £200,000 a year additional income if you wanted to choose it. It's not something that there's a policy decision on at the moment, but as part of this evening, if you don't think that you can contain all the expenditure within the income, you could add another £200,000 on each year's income. But that you're making a decision on implementing the government's rent convergence. And that's, to keep it simple, that's additional pound rent increase on all those people living in properties where the properties aren't at the formula rent level already, they're at a lower rent level. So we're going to ask you to draw on each grant for your solution year on year, and to make it really clear, decisions you make in first year follow through across the years. So you need a bit of foresight in terms of a decision making year one. For argument's sake, if you want to build some new homes in year one, then the cost of those new homes flow through into the next 5 years. They're not one-off costs. I'll explain that in a minute. As Councillor Reach said, there's no right answer. There's 4 different policy options, up to you to decide how you want to balance that. And clearly what this evening's about is understanding from all of you the sort of balance of the policy options that you see that will help us deliver the Housing Revenue Account budget and business plan in the future. So here's the income across the years, which, as I've said, is actually drawn for you on the charts at the moment. And these are in millions. So in 32-33, we're predicting £60 million worth of income from rent and service charges, up to 68.5 million in 36-37. And I'm sure some of you are going to ask the question, well, why there's only a £500,000 increase between 2035-36 and 36-37. That's because the government's current rent regime runs out in 35-36, where it's CPI plus 1%. So we've made an assumption that it won't carry on into the next year. That's why there's only a smaller increase that year. But there actually might be a larger increase. We just don't know at this point in time. As I said, a policy option, if you wanted to add on rent convergence, you could add on an additional £0.2 million on each one of those across the years if you wanted to. We're keeping it very simple. We're not going to compound that £200,000. We'll just keep it as £200,000 year on year. So the expenditure items are the important bit, and I've got a table later on to go through that. You can change the amounts for some expenditure items, but not all. So housing management costs can be reduced, but not significantly. You're aware in the current housing revenue account that's going to council later on in this week, we've made proposals to make £1 million worth of savings. So it shows that savings can be made on that. That's the sort of magnitude of savings you might be looking at, although there'll be a law of diminishing returns. But you certainly can't be taking out circa £5-6 million worth of housing management costs without significant impact on the services that could be delivered. Similarly, for repairs and maintenance, you can take off, relatively small amounts of repairs and maintenance. You can't take out big chunks. We just wouldn't be able to achieve our statutory obligations as a landlord in terms of the repair and maintenance of people's homes if you're taking out sort of big 7-figure sums, £5-6 million a year out. There's some things that can't be changed. Depreciation costs cannot be reduced. That's a calculation every year that in effect funds the major and planned works. And it's a calculation that's done. We've actually drawn it onto the charts for you. So you already start with the depreciation costs we're assuming on the charts. Interest on debt cannot be reduced because that's supporting the loans that are in the housing revenue account at the moment. So you can't actually reduce those interest payments unless you make savings that are in excess of the income each year, because then you'd be putting the money away in a working balance to improve the position in future to pay off debt. So if you want to make significant savings, you can, and we put a line along the bottom of the graph that sort of shows what the working balance, again, very simple, straight line. We've also included, just as an example, I think it's in year 2036-7, the interest payments go up by £1 million because it will happen. The housing revenue account has loans, and those loans will need to be redeemed at certain points in time. And if at the point it needs to be redeemed, interest rates are considerably higher, like they are now, and we were forced to redeem them then, we'll pay more interest. There's no way around that. And that has to be met before anything else. So there's only £1 million in there, but it does give you an indication of how things could be. Lastly, just to simplify. Councillor Hall's question.
Carolyn.
Chair, just to clarify on interest rates, because obviously that's not in our control, but the calculation and the forecasts that we make are obviously significant. Are the interest rates in here completely aligned with all the other predictions in the general fund for the council? And on what basis is the 151 making those assumptions about the interest rates going forward, please?
So as I said, we've sort of rounded these figures up. They're not exactly what's in the housing revenue account, but they're indicative of what's in the housing revenue account at the moment. So the current HRA business plan assumes interest rates going across the board. You'll remember in the housing revenue account that's going to council, end of this week, we were able to identify some savings because the current borrowing rates are slightly lower than what we were predicting before. So it changes, you know, and we haven't got a crystal ball. If we had a crystal ball and know what the interest rates are going to be in the future, then probably wouldn't be working here because we'd be making a lot of money in the city. So we can only make our best guesses, and we've been relatively prudent on those interest rates. They are, I mean, Kevin can probably give more detail. They're the ones the Section 151 officers agreed.
Sorry, and they're universal across all of the council activity, general fund and HRA, because historically we've had different ones in the two accounts. I'm just looking for clarity.
Yes, and it's a bit more complicated than that because, of course, there's internal borrowing as well. So some of the HRA debt is internally borrowed to the general fund. So it's not even as straightforward as that. So as I've said tonight, we try to keep it as simple as possible to work this out, just to focus the debate on the policy options rather than the numbers as such.
If I may just add, Chair, as well, obviously whatever we talk about here, the 151 officer will be key because given the kind of the scale of the borrowing. So although I said, you know, let's be kind of pragmatic and just work through it tonight, we have to be aware that fundamentally, if the 151 officer says, you know, you're loading this council up with debt, it won't go ahead. So it's about showing that restraint. So there is clearly a hell of a lot of work between whatever comes out of this committee this evening and whatever subsequent decisions get made that will need to be done, and the 151 officer will be key.
Thank you, Simon.
So the last point, what we've done in here, because clearly in terms of assessing the cost of additional new affordable homes past 2032, we're trying to find an easy way to enable you to factor those costs into the HRA business plan. So we're suggesting you express the cost of a new social rent home as £20,000 per home. But that's for the life of the plan. If it was an affordable rent, it would be £17,500 per home for the life of the plan. So the example we've got on the slides here, 5 social rent homes would cost £100,000 a year, but that's £100,000 every year. And that's we've wrapped a lot of things up into that £20,000 figure, which is the cost, the rent that can support the debt, and what the net cost is to the housing revenue account. Does that make sense? It was the easiest way to express that. So we thought we'd set out some examples, you're probably aware of this already, but what's included in some of those expenditure items. So if you want to make cuts in there, you understand what the impact might be. Repairs and maintenance, clearly reactive day-to-day and out-of-hours repairs, work around asbestos if we have to do any work to encapsulate, repair, remove, damp and mould, home health and safety rating assessment repairs. Always get that wrong. So that's if there's any category 1 hazards in people's homes that we have to respond to immediately. That's the cost of that in there. Cost of void work, so bringing properties back into use. Cyclical maintenance, so that's revenue, large scale works, all the compliance work, safety checks. Property and estate inspections, so work outside people's homes. Adaptations, so if people have a disability and we need to adapt their home, that's in that repairs and maintenance overall figure as well. The administration and all that, and also communal area maintenance and signage. So the classic example would be a sheltered housing scheme. If there were a communal area in there and it needed signage, that sort of thing, that's captured in that overall repairs and maintenance headline figure.
Sorry, Chair, but I think some of these elements are really important to just ask so that when we go into this, we know where we stand. It was really helpful at the Cabinet Housing Committee recently that Prashanta talked about actually sort of rescoping some of the retrofit and how she was able to get a better balance, more cost effective, a better sort of delivery. And obviously that's a very important number that we all want to deliver, but there are more ways to approach this. And she clearly came up, and the team came up with a better approach to that. And it's such a significant number and a delivery point. Is there something there that we should be paying any attention to in repairs and maintenance if you take retrofit in there, to ensure that we're getting the best value for money and actually doing the right things over that time period, please?
Yes, retrofit's not in here. Retrofit at the moment is funded by borrowing. So we're increasing the debt of the housing revenue account to fund for retrofit works.
And I think the other thing, just to add to that as well, as one might expect to be said, one would assume there'll be government funds in future. That's not in our plan here, but what would expect government would continue SHF future waves. And I think this is obviously an exercise in trying to kind of simplify what is a really complicated account. The other thing I would add is where we've done some retrofit as well. We've looked at how that can be self-funding. So I guess in a sense it's neutral, other than to the quality of the homes as well. So this is an imperfect exercise. You know, there's a whole officer team devoted to managing the HRA. What we're trying to do this evening is just try to get big picture, broad brush. You know, what is the priority, and take that forward as a recommendation.
Chair, I understand that, and I understand the desire to make it simple, but the reality is the HRA is a complicated animal, and many, Karen's laughing, but it's many moving parts, and we can all be very simplistic and say we want no houses or reduce the debt, but actually the reality is that there are so many moving parts in the next X years. There will be those things coming and going. So I suppose the question is, are we capturing in this meeting too those other elements that might give us opportunities? So if something fell our way in terms of changes that tenants were happy with and that we were able to execute, would that therefore trigger a different route for us because more money became available? Because we can be very simplistic, but that's probably not the reality of the HRA in everyday life.
Thank you, Councillor Harold. Yeah, just reflecting on Councillor Reach's point there, the idea with this activity is to sort of make it quite simple, and as a result, maybe, as you say, we actually miss some of those nuances. But what we're looking to do is actually come up with at least the feelings and the sort of main priorities that this committee and the additional members that we've invited to come this evening actually have in the area of the HRA. But if I can ask Simon to just respond to that, thank you.
I think what's important to say, and perhaps I didn't say at the beginning, we all need to recognise, unfortunately, this is a zero-sum game. You spend more, you have to fund it from the housing revenue account. If we are successful in securing additional external funding for things, it's a bonus. And obviously we will always look for that bonus, and there's evidence that we do that in terms of Homes England funding for new homes, SHDF. But the starting position has to be a balanced housing revenue account that addresses the policy options of the council in terms of the balance between new homes, investing in the stock, maintaining service levels, and redeeming or not redeeming debt. That's the base position on this.
Councillor Reach.
Thank you, Chair. And I mean, I think it would be also useful to think about opportunities and risks. So there is a task at hand that I think we're trying to do this evening, but there's always new technology. There'll be climate change risk. There will be all manner of things that will pull in different directions. At the moment, everyone's telling me about AI. At the moment, it's not immediately clear to me how that is employed in the HRA, but there will be some opportunities, I'm sure, for savings. So I guess, subject to the Chair's agreement, if the groups identify things that they think over the lifetime of this exercise could be a risk, could be an opportunity, please capture them. And then that in and of itself is quite a helpful exercise as well when thinking long term.
Councillor Lee, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to pick up on something Councillor Horrell said, and these other elements. So HRA viability can be improved by internal carbon pricing or carbon accounting. I wonder if Mr. Henry can say a little bit about that. And is that a factor that we can think about? Because my understanding is you can improve project net present value. You can use treasury carbon values to significantly improve revenue potential, albeit small. And these are factors that I think don't seem to be talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. By all means, I mean, you're talking about things which are a level of detail that we weren't going to get into this evening. If you think there's that, you will bring that knowledge to bear on supporting the sort of service costs reductions that you will need to make. I mean, we'll come on to how things are going to work in terms of housing revenue. I will assure you, you will struggle to balance the housing revenue account year on year, costs against income. As we stand at the moment, you will need to give some thought to which areas you want to reduce expenditure in. And if you think that's an opportunity, it will give you some confidence that that might be achievable. We weren't intending to go into that level of detail this evening, but hopefully, you know, from the knowledge you've got, you'll have some confidence that might be achievable. This evening is all about quite high level, £60 million worth of income in 2032-33 and £61 million worth of costs. So which area are you going to cut costs in first? It's that simple. And then if you want to add new costs into that year, where are you going to look, which of those new costs are going to be, and what additional costs are you, savings are you can look for to justify those new costs? And as I said, unfortunately, it is a zero-sum game. Add more costs in and you haven't got the income for it, then something has to give to pay for it.
Sorry, Councillor Horrocks, my apologies. I didn't anticipate this being as long in terms of the introduction. If you'd like to take a place, then you've taken that opportunity already. So that was the reason for the conversation with you early. I didn't want you to feel as if it was obstructing you to be involved. And sorry, if Liz, time, do you want to come forward as well? So as I'd anticipated this being, yes. Sorry.
Was Councillor
Murphy. Just had a question, it's very much clarifying in this sort of centre of what we're trying to do here. So in this so housing cost that you've given us, this 20k for the social housing per unit, although this may be blindingly obvious, as I was to say it out loud, does that mean in terms of for us planning, if we wanted to think about adding 100 houses, then we need to think about finding it's £2 million. It really is every year going forward. So actually, if just the end say that out loud, if we wanted to add 100 houses a year for the period, cumulatively it has to you're building towards that. So this gives us the sort of scale of what we're doing to keep up with the rate of 1,000 that we're currently planned over the existing period. Okay.
So as I said, to keep it simple, £20,000 a unit. So 5 units, £100,000, 100, £2 million, and it's year on year through the rest of the plan. I know we can probably deal with some of the questions as we get into the groups as well. That's
what I was just going to say is that the idea of having officers here is that once we then split into the groups, many of these questions can be asked in that group. Then part of the feedback from that group will actually be to cover some of the things that you've then discovered, maybe individually or within that particular group. Okay, so rather than sort of slowing the process down, I'd like to get into that. Sorry, Councillor Morris, I can see your.
Sorry, this is more a broad question, which is why I'm sort of interrupting. You mentioned it's a zero-sum game. I'm sure it's a terrible idea, but can we borrow more money? Could you explain, for the benefit of myself and other fellow councillors, why borrowing more money would be a terrible idea and is not an option which is open to us?
You could borrow more money, but you've got to pay for it. There's an interest cost on there, so it's not a free good. You still have to pay for it in the house revenue account.
But if is that something we could factor in? We would accept we'd be paying off more interest, that level would increase, but we could build more houses that way. That's an option which is open.
That is how we've constructed the exercise this evening. So as I said, we've wrapped up the cost of a new affordable home as a £20,000 a unit cost year on year, rather than breaking it down into how much does interest go up, how much does housing management cost, how much does the rent go up. We've kept it simple by just saying the net effect of a new social rent housing unit is £20,000 year on year. The net effect of an affordable housing unit, because the rents are higher, is £17,500 year on year. And that factors everything, all those different elements into one cost. They don't pay for themselves, a new unit.
But to just follow your point, is that, so, oh, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Reach, if you just respond, and I think I'd like, because otherwise we could actually spend the whole evening in a interactive session around the table. The idea was that we'd have an interactive session around a flip chart in groups, at which point these questions can be asked. I'm not closing down the discussion. What I want to do is actually to move it into the area where we are actually in the groups. Okay, so as has been said by Councillor Reach, if there are officers here, Councillor Bolton, who can actually answer those questions in those groups, okay? So I think what we'd like to do is, if there are things that you are unable to resolve, or as was just being said, things that might, sort of be opportunities for the council in the future, list those on your flip chart. Actually record them and use that as part of your feedback into the group after the 45-minute breakout session. Okay, so what I'd like to do is, if there's further comments, if I ask Simon now to conclude the presentation, then we'll go into those groups. If after that we've had those group sessions, there are still further conversations and discussions, we can have that afterwards. Okay, what I'm concerned is that we're now getting towards, well, past 7 o'clock. We haven't got into the groups yet. Those groups are going to be 45 minutes, and then there's going to be some feedback after that. Okay, so as I say, not trying to close things down, but just want to move the meeting on. Okay, so thank you very much, Simon.
So the next slide was just for those that aren't familiar with this, an explanation of the sort of items that are included in that housing management line: tenancy management, antisocial behaviour, addressing that, cost of mutual exchange and lettings, tenancy sustainment. So that's when we work with customers to make sure they maximise their income, securing all the benefits they're entitled to, leaseholder and shareholder management, debt collection and rent management, so the income team, managing our sheltered housing stock, and also tenant engagement. Those are the main items that exist in the housing management costs at the moment. So this is the important slide which we'll leave up for you, which is in your slide pack as well. And these are the important numbers that you'll need to look at to complete the task this evening. So just looking at the bottom line, which I've already gone through, which is the income each year from rent and service charges. And I said you can supplement that by, if you want to introduce rent convergence, by £200,000 a year. But then those numbers above are what our predictions are of the costs for housing management, repairs and maintenance, depreciation and interest payments year on year across those 5 years. We've already said you can't touch depreciation and interest payments. So the balance between depreciation and interest payments and the income is what you've got available to fund housing management, repairs and maintenance. If there's a balance over and above that, then you can use that to invest more in the housing stock, which might be more retrofit work, or you can use it for new homes, or you can use it to redeem debt. Those are your 3 options available. So that's an important slide for you to have at your fingertips when you work in your groups. A bit of mental arithmetic required to do that balancing up between those items. As was, do you want to? We'll sort of move between the 3 groups to answer the questions as they come up to help you in your deliberations. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. So what we'll do now is we're going to adjourn. The camera will be switched off, so we're not actually streaming out to the general public. We can have the conversation for the next 45 minutes in private within this room. So what I would ask is that we've actually allocated the groups into 3 groups. What I would ask, are we able to display those, Matthew? Okay. What I'd ask is that when we sort of split, you move to a flip chart. So I think flip chart 1 is over there, 2 here, and 3 here in the corner. Can you please nominate a spokesperson for the group who is a full member of the committee? We will come back, and what I'm suggesting is that we can then have some feedback in this more wider group, but that then when we go into summary and debate, that the committee collapses back into the full and regular members of the committee. We can do the feedback, but if you can have the feedback nominated a spokesperson who is a full member of the committee, so that they can then continue that conversation in the actual meeting. Okay, so I think Simon's putting up the groups. So I say flip chart 1. So if Lynn, Neil, myself, and Richard will go over to there. Group 2, Sandra, Danny, sorry. Councillor Lee, we're in right now. So Danny, Johnny, and Nathan to flip chart 2, Adrian, Caroline, Chris, and Russell to flip chart 3. Okay, if I can draw us back into session now, the cameras and our streaming is now back on, so we're now back into formal session. Like to thank all of the officers, our representatives from TACT and the members for the involvement in the last, well, it's probably a bit more than 45 minutes now, so apologise to any audience who might still be there out on the YouTube. We've actually overrun and I think had a very successful session in terms of understanding education of the members of the committee and the visitors to it. I'd like to now just pass over to Simon to give some summary of what the feedback from the three groups that we've had undertaking the discussion this evening. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to run through the feedback, which I made some notes from each group. If you remember, split into three different groups. The first group that made notes on it, given officers the challenge of looking at a 5% reduction in costs of repairs and maintenance and housing management over the period in question, generating a sum of money that then will be devoted towards supporting more affordable housing development by the HRA, and looking at the split between social rent and affordable rent, and raising the question about whether moving towards having more affordable rented properties because they are more cost effective in terms of the amount of subsidy required. Making it really clear that in terms of looking at those cost savings in those areas, we should engage with customers because often they'll know the best way to find savings on the cost of services. And also in terms of new development, look at working in partnership with other organisations to make sure that the HRA is not the organisation always doing the heavy lifting in terms of provision of new affordable housing in the district. I should also mention that group had taken a view on rent convergence as well and had decided that that should be implemented across the period in question. The second group were agnostic on the introduction of rent convergence, raised the question about whether there should be an increase in disposal programme in the housing revenue account, disposing of properties that have particular high cost for refurbishment and repair, and reinvesting that money back into perhaps funding the affordable housing programme. Again, looking at reducing the cost of repairs and maintenance and housing management, and looking at where the housing revenue account has produced a product such as Passive House, and is there a way of trading some of the carbon benefits from that? Is there a way of getting additional benefit on the back of that over and above the actual carbon saving and the quality of life for those people living there? And the last group again made the challenge of a 5% saving across costs over the year, looking at establishing a programme for new homes and looking at the split between affordable and social rent on that, and raising the importance of looking for additional funds, which could be seen as a bonus to the housing revenue account, but will allow more policy options to be investigated. And lastly, Chair, I think as officers, we've found that really interesting and very helpful in terms of looking at policy development. We're really grateful to hear the views of the committee, whether they think that's a productive way of engaging that policy development in future some other areas, because we could run a similar process if you're so minded, and found that a productive way of developing policy.
Thank you, Simon. So just to open it to the committee, were there any other items that you'd like to have, sort of on that list that Simon's gone through? Just as a clarification, I don't want any large items that suddenly sort of come from left field, but any clarifications on those that would just sort of help the officers in terms of their further work. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, I suppose the additional one that was brought out by the numbers was the exposure to the interest rate at which we will be renewing loans, and actually the importance of factoring that into any plans, because it does put pressure and potentially raises the risk. Although obviously if they fall and we can get better terms, it frees up money we can use.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some clarification on what I call the shift from the EPC SAP modelling home energy model, which strengthens perhaps the business case, maybe for upgrades in some of the work that we do.
Tom?
I'm not sure what the question is there.
Yeah, my understanding is that the shift from SAP to the home energy model will change the dynamics of how we approach looking at our housing stock.
Yes, so if there's a requirement for, at the moment, the EPC rating provides certain scores to certain elements. For example, it may give a greater benefit to the existence of a gas boiler in a property, and therefore if there's a change in the future in the rating, we have to move away from that, then that could generate additional investment requirements in the housing stock, which aren't factored in at this point in time.
Thank you, Simon. Sorry? Oh, Councillor Horrell.
Chair, one thing that I think we were going to ask the officers to look at is whether some of the work we undertake through third parties, we could consider having in-house resource to do that, whether that would be more cost effective for us on particular aspects of our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? So I'd just like to go back to the formality then and ask if there's any debate on either the process that we've gone through this evening, or in terms of your understanding now, hopefully a bit fuller, of the mechanisms we have available in terms of setting an HRA budget. Councillor Bolton?
Thank you for organising it. It was hugely helpful to me to understand better the dynamics at play. I don't think, well, I certainly hadn't realised how tight the manoeuvring is within the HRA account. I guess what it's left me wanting to understand is where we can get those, because the only way that we can achieve anything here is, one of the main ways of achieving anything here is by savings, and understanding what lies beneath those broad headings of repair and maintenance and housing management. The detail is where the devil is on all of that, and just to what extent we can make significant savings that would then free up the ability to invest further in the HRA account is really quite difficult to see from this, this angle at the moment. But yeah, thank you for doing that. I've found it really helpful as well.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. And yes, I think from the discussions and the feedback, there was an assumption that certainly within two groups of a 5% saving on both the housing management and the repairs and maintenance. So I think maybe one of the policy requests that we have, or inputs to the policy conversation, is for officers to go away and find out where, and exactly coming back to your point, Councillor Bolton, where within each of those areas would those savings could those be actually made, and come back to us and give some more detail on what the impact and the implication would be on a 5% saving in those two areas. So I think we've gone at the high level to say that's probably the minimum that would be required to maintain the status quo. It might then achieve a slight sort of shortfall that we could use for additional housing, but nonetheless, the minimum that I think both groups came to was 5% saving to make it sort of viable to continue in that way. So I think that's probably something that we would ask the officers to go away and come back with more detailed proposals of how that might be achieved, and therefore tell us what the implications are. And then we could make a decision, or not a decision, because that's obviously to Cabinet. We as a policy committee can't make any decisions. We make recommendations, we refer things. So it would be to, sort of see what the reality is of our high level decisions. If we then say the implication of that is actually far too great, and we can't sort of live with that either ourselves or through our tenants in terms of the impact on them, because at the end of the day we are just we're talking about the reality of people who are living in our homes that we then maintain and sort of repair. So if that's too high, then we have to even that 5% might not be achievable. Okay, so any further debate? Councillor Brophy.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was very interesting how this discussion was framed very much by what we saw in front of us in terms of parameters discussion. One of the question areas we had to play with was repayment of debt or new homes. And that immediately frames things in a certain way. And then you look at the actual spend items, and one of the biggest ones, a third of the annual cost, is interest payments. And to me, looking at that, that was the biggest, shiniest lever to grab to say, how much can we do there? But then when you look at what the amount that you can save, even assuming there's 5%, that's not necessarily going to take a massive amount of any debt down that would materially impact over a 5-year period that interest payment. And it's quite interesting that we played in our discussion around with the option of, right, could you front load paying down debts and what the impact of that would be. And one of the interesting ironies of that was that, or the things that came out of it was I felt myself as someone who feels intuitively more to the left of politics, acting as the fiscal hawk, while one of my esteemed colleagues, who's possibly at the other end of that spectrum, was very much reminding me, importantly, about the people on the waiting list for new homes as well. And so it's interesting how the framing of these spreadsheets, when you look at it through the lens of a spreadsheet, can produce one political set of choices, whereas when you look at it through the lives of the people on the waiting list and their direct experience, it sounds very different. And I think it was kind of a useful reminder of the challenges that the HRA has to balance, and the challenges the officers are grappling with as well, but also the lack of freedom we do have in that, because actually when you looked at what you could achieve by reducing down debt, you are talking about salami slicing. That's not necessarily, the big opportunity it seems to be.
Councillor Murphy.
Well, one just want to say thank you again for the organising, and definitely I felt both it was a very useful exercise in itself. If there are other areas of decisions we are looking at, and it could be done framed in that way, certainly it feels like a really good way to get our heads around what are very complex issues. And then I suppose the other thing that struck me out of it is obviously we have local government reorganisation, and given the significance of the housing account, how much what we've done here, doing with potentially a wider unit tray, actually prioritising early, getting everybody there's head around the dynamics would be hugely beneficial rolling forward, given it may cover such a down area and with people who are not familiar with that sort of account. So I think take that learning, if we can take that learning lesson as well.
Councillor Morris.
Yeah, I'd just like to observe that because we've gone so far with our retrofit programme, and we are currently buying houses which are with heat pumps and which are energy efficient, that puts any future council in a much better position to justify increases in the social in rent of those properties, because those residents will be having lower bills. And if we hadn't had the great foresight to be so advanced with the retrofit programme, we'd be in the awkward position that many other councils found themselves in, where there would be increasing rents and people's bills would be going up as well. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
I won't repeat everything that has been said, just to endorse what has been said. I think the freestyle dynamic interaction with the officers was very, very welcome. And dare I say it, with one of the tenants who grounded us and held us in a world of reality when we wanted a deliver more new homes growth model, when actually, we need to consider many of the other factors. So it brought us back down to earth with a bang. It's not easy, and I appreciate the challenges the officers have. So very useful. Thank you.
That's oral.
Chair, thank you, and thank you for inviting some extras like myself to the meeting this evening. I think the format is really helpful. Historically, we've done something like this, and it would be great to bring back this type of activity for councillors to be better informed, so that when they're making the policy decisions, it's based on sound facts. As you know, I'm keen that we try and maintain a new homes opportunity for those individuals who are on the list, continue to be on the list, and given the expense of our district for housing, that we give people that opportunity that they wouldn't get necessarily via any other route. However, I think tonight we've raised two things that perhaps we should be encouraging to do more of. One is that whole approach to sort of working differently and in partnership with others who are in the market of providing homes, community land trusts, other charitable organisations, other housing trusts who might have similar aspirations to us, and whether we can, it's not always us doing the heavy lifting, as we've said already this evening, and also perhaps to challenge ourselves on a better use of some of our assets where we have great land and housing, but perhaps we could do more and better with it to provide a greater return for residents locally. So I'm afraid there's probably a long list for officers to go away and research. So not an easy task, and I appreciate their openness with us tonight and the challenge that we've given to them and them to us in terms of trying to move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all very much. I'd like to just put my sort of compliments to all of the people who've been around the tables and around the flip charts for wholeheartedly putting yourselves into the exercise that we put in front of you. I think certainly for me, as much as obviously by the sound of it yourselves, has revealed the challenges that our officers perform on a regular basis in terms of bringing the budgets forward. I think it has certainly made what would otherwise be and can also be sort of I wouldn't say dull, but certainly sort of not sort of as interesting as the activity we've performed today. Papers actually come to life in terms of the reality of what's behind the words that are often written on those that come forward to these committees. So I think I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, particularly to the officers for their support, for their guidance, and for encouragement to sort of open up these areas because they weren't sure as to what we might come up with. Hopefully we've kept within the rails and we haven't gone too far off track, but thank you all very much, and interested to see what the officers will bring back to this committee in a future occasion. And just on that point, Matthew, I know it'll be into the new council year, but when is our next meeting?
1st of July, Chair.
Okay, so thank you. That's the 1st of July. We may be the same members around the meeting table. We may, given that I won't take that personally. I obviously we have a few things that are going to occupy us between now and then, but look forward to see you again at this meeting in July. So thank you all very much again. Good night. Thank you.